All right, here we are again to talk about the Middle Ages. Today we're going to discuss the formation of four major nations: England, France, Spain, and Russia. We're going to start with England. We're going to go back to the late 800s with Alfred the Great, an Anglo-Saxon king who fought off Viking invaders in the late 800s. Unfortunately, Alfred the Great didn't live forever. In 1016, a Danish king named Canute is going to swing in and conquer the Anglo-Saxon territories in England. He's going to eventually kind of merge the Anglo-Saxons and the Danish Vikings together into a single group of people, what we're going to call the English. Um, not too many years later, in 1042, we're going to have a king of England named Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor, as his name suggests, is a very religious guy, very pious. But his big problem is when he dies in 1066, he has no son, no heir to pass the throne on to. And this is going to kind of leave things open in terms of the succession. What ends up happening is we get a guy named William of Normandy, an individual descended from the Vikings, or the Norsemen or Northmen, settling in northern France. He's a cousin of Edward the Confessor, and he decides, when his cousin dies, that it's a good opportunity for him to come over and, conquer England like you do. So he invades in 1066, defeats Harold Godwinson, another claimant to the throne, at the Battle of Hastings. Harold actually dies in the battle, and William wins and claims all of England as his own personal property. He's going to take land from the Anglo-Saxon nobles, give it to his own men, pass it out, make them his vassals, gives them all the power. And it's going to kind of change the shape of England and England's power structure for many years to come. England is going to have a very strange kind of stratification to its social class system. The upper classes are all going to be French. They're going to speak French. They're going to not use English words. And then the lower working class, the peasants and the people living in the towns, are going to be speaking English. So instead of calling pigs pigs, they're going to call them pork. Instead of calling a cow, it'll be beef. So those are the French words. It's where you get the ironic phrase, "pardon my French," and then someone curses in English. And the reason those curse words are considered in poor taste is because they're English, not French. About 100 years later, we have Henry II, English king from 1154 to 1189. He's going to hold land not just in England, but also in France, because of William of Normandy. He had whole land holdings in France, comes over, conquers England, so here we've got Henry II. Henry II is also going to marry a woman named Eleanor of Aquitaine. Aquitaine is a region in western France that has excellent farmland, and he marries her mostly for her farmland. But this makes him a lord himself in England, but also a vassal to the King of France, which is kind of an interesting and odd situation to be in. Now, Henry's going to be important for a lot of reasons. First of all, he strengthens the royal courts and introduces juries into legal proceedings. So instead of a judge deciding whether you're innocent or guilty, it's a jury of your peers. He's also going to start using what's called common law, a unified body of law that's the same everywhere in his kingdom. So the idea is that the king's justice always applies the same no matter where the king is or where the crime is committed. It forms the basis for law in England. Now, Henry has a couple of very famous sons. One of them, Richard the Lionheart, is going to be king of England for a short time, but he's going to spend most of his time as king off fighting crusades. His youngest son is a guy named King John. If you're at all familiar with the Robin Hood stories, King John is the jerk who's taxing everybody too much, because he's trying to fight wars, and he's not very good at it. And he needs more money to fight the wars, and it's not going very well. So in 1215, his barons, his noblemen, are going to force him to sign a document called the Magna Carta, or Great Charter. And what the Magna Carta does is it establishes a guarantee for basic political rights to the Englishman. And some of these are going to sound awful familiar. First of all, we've got no taxation without representation. Second, we have a right to a trial by a jury of your peers. We have protection of the law. These are all things that are enshrined in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Ideas that are very, very important, not just to the English, but to people in the United States. And this is where it all kind of starts. One of the things created by the Magna Carta is a body called Parliament. It's the English lawmaking body. It's not going to be called until 1295 by Edward I, but it's going to become a very important part of the English government. Today, Parliament basically runs everything in England. They control the government. The Queen, while she still exists, is a figurehead. She has no real power. Now let's talk about France. The last Carolingian king, the last king in the dynasty created by Pepin the Short and Charlemagne, is a guy named Louis the Sluggard. And as we've discussed before, when you get an epithet like sluggard, it's not a very positive thing. When he dies in 987, Charlemagne's empire, the massive, massive Holy Roman Empire that Charlemagne had created that covered France and Germany and most of Central Europe, has been broken up into 47 different feudal territories. None of them are listening to the king. And so Louis the Sluggard, when he dies, again, leaves no heir. Seeing kind of a problem with monarchy here. You got to have somebody to pass it on to. So we've got all these different feudal territories fighting with each other, trying to see who's going to be in charge. And they're going to nominate a guy named Hugh Capet, a minor French nobleman, and choose him to be the next king. He's going to rule from 987 until his death in 996. And while he himself is not very strong or very important, he is going to establish what we call the Capetian dynasty, which is going to rule France from 987 until 1328. Now, admittedly, Hugh Capet only controls a very small area of France, most of it around the city of Paris, which is his stronghold. It's called the Ile-de-France, the island of France. But gradually, over the course of the next 300 years, the Capetian kings are going to expand their power and control over France. One of the most important guys to do this is going to be Philip II, also called Philip II Augustus. He's going to be king of France from 1180 until 1223. Not only is he going to work to strengthen the power of the French monarchy, he's going to work to weaken France's rival, their main enemy, England. He argues and fights with Henry II. He argues and fights with Henry II's son, Richard. He argues and fights with Henry II's son, John. Like, it's just kind of a big running thing. He's actually going to work to take English territory away in France away from King John during a war that lasted from 1204 to 1206. And he's going to work to strengthen the French central government by establishing royal officials called bailiffs. And the job of these bailiffs is to collect taxes. So instead of relying on his noblemen, who don't really want to listen to what he's saying, he's going to rely on the bailiffs to do the job for him. Another important French king, Philip IV, he's going to be king from 1285 until 1314. He's going to get involved in a major dispute with the Pope over whether or not priests and churches in France should have to pay taxes. The Pope is going to say, no, they should not have to. Philip IV says, yeah, they should. They've got all the best land. They've got all this wealth that they're piling up for the church, but it's not going to France. It's not helping with France. So Philip IV is going to call something called the Estates General together. The Estates General is a meeting of representatives from the three major social classes in France: the clergy, the priests, the nobility, and the commoners. Now, when Philip IV calls the Estates General together, this is the first time that the commoners are included. They don't have a whole lot of power. Each estate, each group only gets one vote, and the clergy and the nobility are usually going to vote together as a block and kind of use it as an opportunity to give the shaft to the poor people. So the poor people are going to pay more in taxes. They're going to not have as much power and as much freedom as the nobility and the clergy, but you'll talk more about that when you get to the French Revolution next year. Our next country is Spain. Spain is conquered by the Umayyad Caliphate, a Muslim group, in 725. Under the Umayyads, it is referred to as Al-Andalus. The Muslims in Spain are often referred to as Moors. And in fact, across Europe, you'll often hear Muslims referred to as Moors. As in the Muslim Empire in the Middle East, non-Muslims in Spain are tolerated, but a lot of people in Spain are going to end up converting to Islam in order to avoid paying extra taxes as Christians or Jews. Spanish, even though it's a Romance language, is going to have all those Latin roots, just like French or Italian or Romanian, but it's also going to have a mixture of Arabic in there because of this Muslim influence. We're also going to see a lot of influence from Islamic architecture in various regions of Spain as a result of this. Islamic Spain is controlled by an emir or duke from the city of Cordoba. We are going to see Christian resistance in northern Spain, fighting back against Muslim rule beginning in the 9th and 10th centuries. This is referred to as the Reconquista or Reconquest. Spanish Christians have managed to carve out several kingdoms in northern Spain by 929, but it's not going to be until the 1490s, under a pair of rulers named Ferdinand and Isabella, that the Reconquista is going to be completed. Those guys are also going to be important. They're the folks that send Christopher Columbus out to discover the New World. Last, we have Russia. Russia is, as we know, located in Eastern Europe. Russia, as we know it, kind of starts with Rurik, a Viking leader who shows up in the city of Novgorod in 862 to be the king of Novgorod. He starts the Rurik dynasty, which is going to rule Russia until 1598. One of his descendants is going to be a guy named Oleg. Oleg is going to move the capital of Russia from Novgorod to Kiev in 880. The move to Kiev gives the Russians access to trade with Constantinople, puts them in a better position. And so Kiev is going to be the major city for a couple hundred years or so. In fact, this time period it's known as the Kievan Rus, or Kievan Russia. Vladimir I is going to be Kievan king from 980 to 1015. He's going to convert to Eastern Orthodox Christianity in 989 and make it the official state religion of the Russian Empire. So everybody in Russia is suddenly an Eastern Orthodox Christian, whether they like it or not. His son, Yaroslav the Wise, is going to forge a bunch of trade alliances throughout Central Europe and with Constantinople through political marriages. He's also going to create the Russian legal code and build the first library for the city of Kiev. The Kievan Rus are basically going to lose power in the early 1200s when the Mongols invade. The Mongols, like the Muslims, are tolerant of other religions and allowed Russians to keep their own religion and customs. They only demanded absolute obedience from the people that they conquered and tribute payments. They are going to isolate Russia from the rest of Europe, but they allow the Rurik dynasty to kind of keep running things for them for the most part. You're going to have a lot of princes, as they're called, even though they're not really like kings or anything like that. Probably one of the most important princes is a guy named Ivan I. He's a prince of the city of Moscow. He actually works for the Mongols, puts down Russian revolts. In exchange, the Mongols are going to give him the title Grand Prince. He's also important because he convinces the Patriarch of Kiev, the leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church in Kiev, to move from Kiev to the city of Moscow, making Moscow the most important city in Russia. But it's his grandson, Ivan III, who's really important. Ivan III is also called Ivan the Great. He's going to openly challenge the rule of the Mongols in the late 1400s. He's going to take the title of Tsar, spelled C-Z-A-R or T-S-A-R. Either way, it's Russian for Caesar. His goal is to make Moscow the third Rome. First Rome would be Rome itself. Second Rome would be Constantinople. By 1480, Constantinople's been conquered by the Turks and is no longer a European city. So here's Ivan seeing an opportunity to become like the new Rome, the third Rome. He's going to face off against the Mongol army in 1480 at the Urga River. The battle ends in a tie, but when you tie with the Mongols, that's basically a victory. And so Ivan III and his son Ivan IV are going to be kind of the first guys to take the title Tsar